everyone, it's Sinead with Free Tours by Foot London. Now, I am again at a cemetery. I'm in West Ham in the borough of Newham. Now, I'm not doing a cemetery tour today. I'm actually here to pay my respects to one of the ladies that are interred here. And today we're going to pay our respects at the grave of Elizabeth Stride, one of Jack the Ripper's victims, one of the canonical five. And Elizabeth Stride, if you refer to my Jack the Ripper tour, you will know, was murdered on the 30th of September 1888, the night of the infamous double event. And for the longest time I talk about these girls. I have been here before, but it's been a while ago, so I will have to try and search. I had a friend with me the last time, it must be about 7 or 8 years ago, but I thought it was time that I came again to pay my respects to these ladies who had such an impact on social reform in the East End of London. So let's have a look around the East London Cemetery and Crematorium. So in order to get here today, ladies and gents, what I did was I got off of the train station Plaistow, and I took a connection then on a bus, the number 69 bus from Plaistow station. It's only about 4 stops then to the East London Cemetery. You can also get to the cemetery via West Ham station, but not to confuse you, Plaistow is on the District line, and I also took a Jubilee line from Waterloo to West Ham, and then I changed for a District line to Plaistow, and a short bus journey will take you 4 stops here to this wonderful cemetery. Now, this cemetery was built to accommodate the growing populations of East London, of course, and the increasing demands for a cemetery in the eastern suburbs. So there's 33 acres in this cemetery, and as you can see, it's a fully working cemetery. As previously mentioned, just if you're watching this on a future date, just to let you know, today is Valentine's Day, and there's a lot of people here laying roses and flowers for their loved ones. So happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Now, there are 2 Gothic 19th century chapels that remain as well in this graveyard. They're quite pretty. We might see them along the way, but as I say, this is not so much a cemetery tour as a little walk up to the grave of Elizabeth Stride. Inside here, there's a couple of separate memorials as well. There's a memorial to the 550 victims of the 1878 Princess Alice disaster. I'm mentioning this because this sunk in the River Thames and has a little connection to Elizabeth Stride in a few minutes, or what Elizabeth Stride told people. Sylvia Coleridge is buried in here, Beryl Cook is buried in here, and I suppose one of the most notable is Karl Hans Lodi. He was executed in the Tower of London on the 6th of November in 1914. Technically, he was the first person to be shot during World War I in the Tower of London. A German spy, he's also buried here under his own black headstone. There are 10 other German spies buried here that were shot in World War I under their own separate memorial. But we're going to take a little journey down here. Now, Elizabeth Stride, originally from Gothenburg in Sweden, when she moved here, she married a local chap. His name was John Stride. And for several years, they lived quite modestly, but in no way impoverished at the time. They ran a coffee shop in the East End in Poplar, and John Stride also was a qualified carpenter, so their income was supplemented from his carpenter work as well. But by 1874, there were signs that the marriage was deteriorating, because there were records of Elizabeth Stride registering herself into the Poplar workhouse, suggesting that she had left him roughly by about 1877, but people tend to think that they were in a kind of an on and off again relationship. That is, of course, until he died in 1884 of tuberculosis. But that fateful evening, her body was discovered by Louis Deanschutz, and that was in Duffield's Yard on Berners Street. She hadn't the inflicted mutilations that the other girls had, but her throat had been slit. Now, when the body was discovered, quite tragically, even though her hands were cold, her body was warm. So this suggested that she had only recently been killed, and the suggestion is, of course, because 45 minutes later Jack the Ripper had brutally mutilated another girl that night in the East End on the 30th of September in 1888. And that girl was Catherine Eddowes, not 45 minutes later at Mitre Square. So she was buried here. She actually, for several years after her husband's death, I forgot to mention this, had said her husband and 2 of her 9 children had died on the Princess Alice disaster, but there's actually no records of that ever occurring. And we believe she was receiving some financial aid as a result of that disaster, and she lost that. So she was working the streets of Whitechapel that night. But she also did a lot of work as a housekeeper and a seamstress. So technically she was part-time. But it is quite emotional for me personally as well to speak so much about these girls and their lives. And I think their legacy is that the publicity of the Jack the Ripper murders highlighted the massive social inequality and the horrendous slums of Whitechapel in the press all over the world. And social reform did come about as a result of the deaths of these girls. But we suspect, of course, Jack the Ripper was interrupted that evening, so there was no time for mutilations. As you'll see here, her very modest grave. We know she is physically buried here. A lot of the other girls' graves are actually just memorials or signs of them. They're paupers' graves, or they tended to be quite... paupers' graves had a lot of multiple burials in them, but this is the gravesite of Elizabeth Stride. Now, her funeral took place here on Saturday the 6th of October. And it was a very small funeral attended by very few people, but she does have quite a few visitors to the gravesite here. A lot of my colleagues will come here on the anniversary of her death to pay their respects. I believe the funeral expenses at that time were covered by the parish and provided by the undertaker, Mr. Hawkes, at the time. So a rather sombre memorial to one of the victims of Jack the Ripper. Now, you might have heard a bit of rustling there. I did bring a lily and I want to lay that down. I hope I haven't damaged it. Excuse me for 1 second. And we'll just leave it there, maybe in the middle of the cherub. This is pay my respects to. It's only a small little token. But there you have it, ladies and gents. In infamous history, may she rest in peace, one of the canonical 5. And her legacy, as I said, and the legacy of all these ladies, wasn't so much their deaths as how they have contributed to massive social reform that took place as a result of the deaths of these girls and the publicity of them all over the world. May Elizabeth Stride's gentle soul rest in peace. And that's grave of Elizabeth Stride, one of the canonical 5. Sinead here in East London Cemetery and Crematorium, signing out.